Imagine this. You are sitting in the United States Congress. The chamber is packed, Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other. A room that has not agreed on anything for what feels like a decade. And then a small silver-haired man with impeccable posture walks to the podium. He is not American. He holds no political office. He commands no military. And yet, when he finishes speaking, the entire room, both sides, rises to its feet. Not once, not twice, multiple times. That man was King Charles III of the United Kingdom. And what happened this week in Washington, D.C. was, by almost every measure, one of the most remarkable diplomatic performances of the modern era. Welcome to the Royal Hour. I'm your host, and today we are going deep, very deep, into everything that happened during King Charles's historic state visit to the United States. We are talking about the speech that even Donald Trump said made him jealous. We are talking about the cancer treatment nobody is discussing. We are talking about the royal family drama, and there is always drama, that tried its very hardest to derail the most important week of Charles's reign. And spoiler, it did not succeed. This is the full story. Let's start with the context, because this visit was controversial before it even began. When it was announced that King Charles would travel to Washington to meet President Donald Trump, the criticism came fast and loud. British commentators, American analysts, and royal watchers across the world were asking the same question. Why is the King of England going to pay court to Donald Trump? Is this not beneath the dignity of the British crown? Is the monarchy being used as a diplomatic prop? Some went further. They said Charles would be mocked. They said he would be used as a stooge. They predicted embarrassment for the king, for Britain, for the entire institution of the monarchy. Those people were wrong. The true purpose of this visit was not ceremony, it was strategy. The British government dispatched the king with a very specific and extremely high-stakes mission to ensure that the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States remains intact. Because if that relationship frays, the ripple effects go far beyond trade deals and diplomatic niceties. We are talking about NATO. We are talking about the defense architecture that has kept Europe stable for 80 years. We are talking about Ukraine and whether the West will hold the line. And the king, by every available measure, delivered. Now let's talk about the speech itself, because this is where the story gets genuinely extraordinary. King Charles addressed a joint session of Congress, only the third British monarch to ever do so. And what he delivered was not the cautious diplomatic non-event that many expected. It was a carefully constructed, brilliantly calibrated piece of statecraft disguised as warmth. Think about the tightrope he was walking. He needed to say things that Donald Trump would not only tolerate but actually appreciate. Things like acknowledging that NATO members need to spend more on defense, things that validated Trump's long-standing frustrations about burden sharing. And he did that, clearly and directly. But at the same time, he needed to say things that Trump has conspicuously refused to say. Words like NATO, Ukraine, democracy. Words that matter. Words that the world was watching for. And he said those too. He made the case for continued American support of Ukraine, which received standing ovations from both sides of the aisle. And here is the genius. He did it without a single moment of hectoring, without sounding preachy, without giving anyone, Trump included, the opportunity to feel lectured at. He leaned into history. He leaned into shared sacrifice. He used a phrase that essentially meant, look what we have achieved when we work together, and it landed. He made a quiet joke about the Artemis moon mission, referring to it as Artemis II, as his family calls it, and the room laughed. He brought warmth to a chamber that has forgotten how to laugh together. J.D. Vance was in that room. Mike Johnson was in that room. And both of them stood and applauded. Nobody predicted that. Not a single analyst. Not a single journalist. Not even the most optimistic supporters of the visit. The speech was reportedly written largely by his communications officer, described by those who know him as a brilliant writer with a great turn of phrase. But a speech is only as good as the person who delivers it, and Charles delivered it with the kind of quiet, commanding authority that only comes from a lifetime of preparation. Then, if that was not enough, he gave a second speech that same evening at the state dinner. By that point, it was 2 a.m. by his body clock. He is in his mid-70s and has been undergoing cancer treatment. And he was, by all accounts, energized. Light. Funny. He gave the president a special bell from an old British submarine and made a little joke. If you ever need us, just give us a ring. The room loved it. Now here's the part of this story that I find genuinely fascinating as a political and cultural phenomenon. When you put King Charles and Donald Trump in the same frame, what do you see? You see two very different kinds of power. Trump is tall, physically imposing, loud, instinctive. He dominates rooms through force of personality and unpredictability. And yet, when you watch the footage of these two men together, something interesting happened. Trump seemed almost deferential, almost impressed. There is a story about Trump regularly writing personal notes to the king, friendly letters, notes about family. This is not something Trump was known for doing with other world leaders under the previous monarch. But something about this relationship is different, and I think I understand why. Donald Trump is, at his core, a showman who loves an audience. He loves to host. He loves to display his power through hospitality, his hotels, his ballrooms, his sense of occasion. And the British royal family, there is nobody who does occasion better. Nobody. When Trump visited the UK for his previous state visit, he was treated to pageantry on a scale that even he could not manufacture. And it made an impression. But beyond the show, there is something else. Charles can say with complete legitimacy, my ancestors were here 250 years ago. We have been tied to this nation since before this nation existed. That is not sentiment. That is weight. That is the kind of historical authority that no elected leader, not even a president, can replicate. And Trump, who is obsessed with legitimacy and legacy, responds to that. After the speech, Trump said he was jealous that Charles had managed to get both Democrats and Republicans to stand for him. That is perhaps the most sincere compliment Donald Trump has paid anyone in years. There was one moment that went quietly viral, footage of Trump leaning over and patting the king on the knee. It is a flagrant breach of protocol. You do not touch the king uninvited, and Charles knew it. You could see it in his expression. But rather than recoiling, he laughed. He played it with warmth. And in doing so, he turned a potentially awkward moment into something that looked like genuine affection. That is diplomatic mastery in real time. I want to take a moment to address something that is not discussed nearly enough in mainstream coverage of the king, his health. We know that King Charles has cancer. He announced it himself, somewhat abruptly. In fact, the announcement came just 3 days after he received the diagnosis, almost certainly because too many people already knew, and the palace felt forced to get ahead of it. For context, if you or I received a cancer diagnosis, we would likely need 3 days just to tell our immediate family. The palace gave the world less time than that. But here is what I can tell you based on the best available information. The treatment appears to be working. And not just working, the results are, by the accounts of those close to the king, genuinely impressive. The treatment program involved a cutting-edge combination of immunotherapy and RNA-based drugs, the same class of technology that underpinned the most successful COVID vaccines. This is not standard cancer treatment. This is the frontier of oncological medicine. Extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily novel, and according to sources close to the palace, extraordinarily effective. At Christmas, the king gave a speech saying his treatment was going well and that he would be able to scale it back. That statement appears to have been genuine, not spin, not royal image management, but an accurate reflection of his condition. There is now among those who know him a real and growing sense of optimism, a belief that what once looked like an existential health crisis may have passed, at least for now. And watching him this week confirmed it. He completed over 550 public engagements in the past year while undergoing cancer treatment. A friend of his attended a recent performance, a ballet or something similar, and Charles stayed talking to the cast until after midnight. This is a man fighting for his life while simultaneously refusing to stop living it. I think there is something genuinely important in that. For all of us who have been touched by cancer, and that is most of us, one way or another, watching the king handle this with dignity and determination is not a trivial thing. It matters. All right, now we need to talk about the family, because the royal family cannot let a moment of triumph exist without complicating it. And this week they delivered complications in stereo. Let's start with Harry and Meghan, because what they did this week was the most brazen act of headline theft. On the very same day that King Charles gave his historic address to Congress, on the day that his father was carrying the weight of Western diplomacy on his shoulders, Harry and Meghan appeared on the cover of People magazine. The story, they will not be ruled by the royal family anymore. They are stepping into their own destiny. They are doing things their way. Nothing in the royal ecosystem happens by accident. These covers are planned weeks in advance. Publication dates are chosen deliberately. Someone made a deliberate, calculated choice to put that story out on that particular day. A choice to pull attention away from the king at his most triumphant moment. What makes it worse, and I say this as someone who believes Harry and Meghan have legitimate grievances, is the context of Charles's health. His father is fighting cancer. His father just walked into the most politically divided capital on earth and emerged with standing ovations. And this was the moment chosen to run a cover story about breaking free from the family. The deeper irony is that Harry and Meghan's entire commercial brand rests entirely on their royal identity. Nobody is buying Meghan's products because she makes exceptional jam. They are buying it because she is, or was, a member of one of the most famous families on earth. The further they distance themselves from that family, the weaker the brand becomes. There is a deep contradiction at the heart of their project, and it is becoming harder to ignore. Now, William and Catherine. This is a different and more subtle situation. On the day after the Congress speech, which also happened to be William and Catherine's 15th wedding anniversary, the Prince and Princess of Wales released a gorgeous family photograph, taken in Cornwall. The children, the smiles, the warmth. It is a beautiful image. And it went straight to the top of the news cycle, knocking the king off the front pages on what was arguably the most solemn day of his tour, his visit to the 9/11 memorial. Was this intentional? The honest answer is probably yes, but probably not maliciously. William and Catherine are the future of the monarchy. This photo speaks to continuity and stability. It is not anti-Charles in content, but the timing was a missed opportunity of spectacular proportions. If William's team had simply held the photo until Friday, until Charles was safely back home, and released a quiet note saying we didn't want to overshadow the king's historic visit, it would have been a masterclass in public relations. It would have shown unity and grace. Instead, it fed the narrative of a house divided. And there is a deeper tension worth understanding. When Charles's cancer diagnosis was announced, the power in the family shifted overnight. Courtiers recalibrated. William's court grew in influence and ambition. Now that Charles is recovering and reasserting himself, there is a quiet but very real struggle for authority. Charles is sending a message, I am still the king. And William is learning that the succession is not yet his to manage. No discussion of the British royal family is complete without addressing the Andrews situation. And yes, it is still very much a situation. The police inquiry into Prince Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein continues. William is said to be deeply frustrated by what he sees as his father's excessive leniency toward Andrew, and he fears that Charles is now making the same mistakes all over again with Harry, being too conciliatory, too willing to leave the door open. The financial dimensions of this scandal are significant. The settlement with Virginia Giuffre, believed to be in the region of $12 to $14 million, was not a quiet personal arrangement. It was processed through the royal household. The keeper of the privy purse was involved. These were institutional decisions, and it appears that Charles was not only aware of the settlement but directly contributed to facilitating it. There have been attempts to reframe the timeline, to suggest that the late Queen acted independently in her final months, leaving an unexploded bomb under Charles's reign. Those close to the situation find that account implausible. The idea that an elderly queen in her final months authorized a multi-million-dollar international legal settlement without the knowledge of her son and heir, the man who would be most directly affected, does not hold up to scrutiny. The expectation is that the police inquiry will quietly conclude there is insufficient evidence to proceed. The royal family does not want this anywhere near a courtroom. And with Charles healthy and back at the helm, the institutional machinery will likely do what it has always done: absorb, contain, and move on. Whether that is another question entirely. So where does this leave us? After the speeches, after the standing ovations, after the drama and the competing headlines and the family soap opera? In the short term, the king will take some downtime. He has earned it. The next major set piece will be Trooping the Color in June. Expect him to appear well, to project strength, to remind the world the institution is stable. The bigger story to watch is Harry's planned trip to the United Kingdom in July for his Invictus Games. He wants to bring Meghan and the children. He has been privately lobbying for an invitation to Sandringham, the King's country retreat in Norfolk. He will almost certainly not get that invitation. But if he brings the whole family to Britain, the pressure on the king to somehow see his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, whom he has barely spent any time with, will be enormous. Charles's dearest wish, and by all accounts this is genuinely true, is reconciliation with Harry. And his second wish is that Harry and William find their way back to each other. Whether any of that is possible given the depth of the estrangement, given the public nature of the grievances, given the commercial architecture Harry and Meghan have built around their outsider status, remains profoundly uncertain. But for 1 week in Washington, D.C., none of that mattered. For 1 week, an aging king fighting cancer walked into the most politically divided capital on earth and reminded people, Republicans and Democrats, royalists and Republican critics alike, of what grace under pressure actually looks like.